This is a message of thanks and gratitude to all you amazing Reluctant Preppers who are making Reluctant Preppers possible by supporting our mission on Patreon. With your help, we're overcoming a 75% drop in YouTube earnings because you're not standing still, but are doing something about it and taking action by going to patreon.com/reluctantpreppers and pledging to keep us on the air. Now our team is 42 patrons strong and growing. And when we reach 100 patrons, we'll start sending out tokens of gratitude as a handwritten note from your host, Dunnigan Kaiser, and an autograph signed on a U.S. Silver Eagle to one of our patrons selected at random each and every month. If you haven't yet taken the step of joining in to support Reluctant Preppers, it's so easy. Just go to patreon.com/reluctantpreppers and pledge any amount you can. You guys are awesome, and we can do this together with your help at patreon.com/reluctantpreppers. Did you know you can buy silver at spot price? Get your 10-ounce bar of silver at spot price today. Go to sdbullion.com/rp. Not only will you be buying silver without any premium, you'll also be supporting the independent media. Reluctant Preppers gets a small commission when you take advantage of this special offer, going to sdbullion.com/rp. That's sdbullion.com/rp. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us here on Reluctant Preppers. Asking for your help tonight because even though we have record numbers of subscribers here on Reluctant Preppers trying to spread the word about preparedness and self-reliance and awareness, we've been receiving reduced revenue from our YouTube videos being marked as advertiser unfriendly and having to curtail the content and the descriptions and the topics and the guests that we can introduce. So with your help, we can overcome that and break free of that restriction. If you go to patreon.com/reluctantpreppers, you can make any amount of small or modest or larger monthly donation to help support our mission. We've established goals there to help bring you even more content with the different levels that we can achieve together. Thanks, folks. Check it out, patreon.com/reluctantpreppers. And now, on to our main event.
As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. We're quite pleased to be able to have a returning guest tonight, J. Wayne Fears, a outdoorsman, an author, an expert on wildlife management. J. Wayne Fears has an extensive career over many decades, starting from Eagle Scout to Army National Guard to U.S. Army, getting a master's in wildlife management. And in his graduate work, he's an author of over 6,200 magazine articles and published 33 books. Popular outdoor TV program host, frequent speaker at outdoor events, working on 3 books currently. He's here with us again here on Reluctant Preppers. J. Wayne Fears, thank you for joining us on Reluctant Preppers.
Always my pleasure.
We were hoping you could circle back with us and talk a little bit about cooking off-grid when people look forward to potential emergency situations when for any reason their normal facilities that might not be available and yet they need to feed their family. They would be very interested in knowing what kinds of special preparations and precautionary arrangements a person ought to be able to make and what to look for and watch out for when planning on cooking off-grid. So if we could delve into that topic, you are an expert at this. You just mentioned you've been hard to get on our program for the past couple of quarters, actually, because you've been off doing this, promoting your recent book tour about Dutch oven cooking and for Lodge Dutch ovens. And if you could just bring us up to date on what it takes to look forward to cooking off-grid and what are the main considerations that people should think about in preparing for that?
Well, first of all, short term, and we're just speaking here of being without public utilities for a few days, people can generally get by with the patio grill or the camp stove or maybe a backpack stove or whatever they might have, because basically there you're just cooking food that is in your freezer that is thawing out. You want to cook that as it thaws. And you may have some emergency freeze-dried food on hand or food that's in your pantry, canned goods and that sort of thing. So when we're talking about short-term survival, it's really not that many skills, and it's not really a hard task. But when we get into long-term...
Well, can I hold you up one moment there? I think you passed over a very key point when you mentioned about cooking thawed food. It made me think about a time when we had a power outage, about a day power outage here, and we store a lot of prepared meals and meats in our freezer, and we thought, oh my gosh, it's going to be a total loss. So are you talking about when people have a power outage that's going to mean they're going to lose the frozenness of their frozen foods, and as that food starts to thaw, you don't have to throw it out, you can cook it as it thaws?
Yeah, and that's, most people in today's world here in the United States have got a lot of food, and most people have the lower part or one half of their refrigerator is a freezer, and then they probably in the garage got another freezer. So you got a lot of food there that's beginning to gradually thaw out, and that's a great food source. You do a lot of cooking, and after you've cooked these various items, they last longer. So for 3, 4, 5 days, you got a pretty good supply right there. And generally that can be cooked, like I said, on a gas grill, your patio grill that you normally use for entertainment on weekends, or the camp stove or whatever. But where people really are not prepared is if we get into a long-term situation, which to me long-term means months, and we think about an EMP or electrical grid that's totally destroyed, or total government failure where there are no utilities whatsoever, then suddenly we wake up and we're pushed back to the 1700s, if not the 1300s. And then you're looking at a totally different situation, because soon you're not going to have the propane tanks to run the gas grills. You're not going to have any power, any natural gas, anything like that. So suddenly the people who have a functional fireplace in their home, or have a wood-burning stove, or have an open fire pit in the backyard, or even if they own some of these highly efficient stick stoves and stoves of that type, where wood is the primary source, then these people can hunker down and begin, if they have, and we'll discuss more on this in a moment, if they got a good supply of wood and they really know how to use a fire and build a fire, then they're prepared to last a long time, provided they can find the food items that they need to eat.
And that's one of the challenges is in order to use these longer-term options, you're not using like propane as you would with a gas grill, that sort of thing, but actual building wood fires. So what about, we've had Brad Harris from Full Spectrum Survival on here. He's talking about the dilemma that the time when you really need a fire is the time when it's the hardest to light a fire.
That's always the case.
So can you talk to us about circumstances that are not favorable?
Yeah, that's always the case. And a lot of the courses I teach just in wilderness survival, not long-term survival, the biggest problem we have to overcome and the skill we have to work the hardest on is getting people in today's world just to learn how to build a basic fire. And then let it be cold, let it be wet and wind blowing, and it becomes more difficult, and you got to learn a few more tricks, a few more skills. So knowing how to build a fire under all circumstances is something you've got to practice beforehand and have the skills mastered before we have an EMP or before the electrical grid goes completely out or whatever the case might be. And unfortunately, many people in today's world can't, they have all the trouble in the world starting a fire under ideal conditions.
And for people who really are open to the idea of, okay, I would like to learn how to do that, and they're willing to put in a little bit of time to practice that, where are some good sources of information to guide them and how to get started? Well,
first thing that I always would recommend them do is buy my book, The Art of Building a Fire, which is available on Amazon. But to get firsthand experience, they need to take a basic survival course, and they're available through your land-grant universities and places like that. it's not too difficult today to find a lot of survival courses that are available. And generally, most basic survival courses will spend a lot of time on fire building, how you get a fire going several different ways, how do you pick your tinder, how do you pick the wood sources, and that sort of thing. So anybody almost anywhere in the United States do just a little bit of a search, they'll find somewhere locally or fairly close to where they live a basic survival course, and I highly recommend people taking that.
And if in a difficult situation, what kinds of wood sources do people need to think ahead about, and what are some of the complications that come up from an emergency situation in that?
Well, you know, a lot of people, especially people that live in apartments in central city situations and things like that, they don't have a lot of wood sources, even though they may have a fire pit in the backyard. And at that point, you got to start looking at city parks, nearby forests, maybe just larger parks. But wood can be an extremely serious situation when it's long-term survival. You look at third world countries, and one of the first things they run out of in so many of those countries is wood that they can use to keep their fires going, to cook, to boil water, to just basically survive. So people need to think ahead of time. Yeah, I've got a wood-burning fireplace, but I pay a guy $150 a year to bring me a little bit of wood. What happens when that guy's not around? His truck doesn't run. You know, where's your nearest wood source? And that's something that needs to be planned long before we have an emergency. As I said, wood can disappear quickly, and the longer the disaster lasts, the further and further you got to go out of where most people live to find wood. Those of us who live in rural areas, we all, or try to all, have wood lots, and there you've got several years' supply of wood.
And in terms of ways of getting the initial ignition started, of starting the wood on fire, what are options that people should consider in that area?
You know, the best thing there, of course, is the old-fashioned wooden, some people call them kitchen strike-anywhere matches, and they're getting to be harder and harder to find. I know where I live is only one or two hardware stores that offer strike-anywhere matches any longer. The Walmarts don't have them. Stores like that do not have them. And then the second source would be magnesium fire starters, and that would be a good program on itself. There are good magnesium fire starters, and there are a lot that are cheap, made in foreign countries that produce poor material, and there are a lot of bad magnesium fire starters on the market. And then more primitive is flint and steel. But you've got to learn how to use all of these and use them efficiently. And again, that takes practice. This is something that you buy you a really good magnesium fire starter, box of kitchen matches, and you wait for the long-term survival situation to occur. And then when it suddenly occurs, your matches have been exposed to humidity. They don't work, and you don't really know how to use the magnesium fire starter. So you need to think about what are you going to do to start these fires? What's going to be your source of the fire? And I always rate kitchen matches number one, strike anywhere kitchen matches, and they need to be stored so that the moisture will not age them quickly. And you need to practice these things. It's not easy to start a fire. You can see it on television all you want to and in movies, but flint and steel can be a very, very difficult way to start a fire. Same thing with a bow drill. I see people all the time that try to start fires with bow drills, and they're exhausted and they still don't have a fire.
At least they're warm by that time.
Yeah, they're warm. That's the gift. They sure are.
But they're hungry too. On the question of wooden matches, I've heard a couple different tips. One said keeping them inside watertight plastic screw-top jars to prevent, if we have a flood or rain or that kind of thing, to keep them from getting wet until they're ready for use. Another person actually said dipping them in paraffin to waterproof them. But I don't know if either of those. Is there anything, the tricks that you do to keep them as fresh as they can be and suitable for use?
Yeah, what I do is I take a box of strike anywhere matches, and I have a device which we use for putting up food in the freezer, which sucks all that air out of it, and it's just there's no air in there, there's no moisture in there, and that's how we store ours. And we've got some that are 2 to 3 years old that when you open them up, they work real good.
Is that a vacuum packer?
Like you were talking about in jars and things. If you live in an area where there's high humidity and you screw the top of that jar on, you've screwed in some air that may be 40, 50, 60% humidity, that will work on those matches. And the paraffin, I've never seen those last more than about a year or so. It's a good idea for short term, but I've just never seen it last for long periods of time.
The tool you talked about, is that a vacuum packer? Is it a heavy plastic bag and it pulls all the air out of the plastic bag?
You use it, basically we use it for putting up venison and elk and things like that. But it works great on striking wood matches because it pulls all the air out. It almost squishes the box.
Yeah.
And we keep them high on the shelf in the pantry, and when time to use them, pop them open, and they're just like brand new box matches.
Any particular brands of the magnesium fire starters that you've found to be consistently good quality? Let me go by size rather than brand. Some of the larger ones, they're about a half-inch in diameter. Those are some of your better magnesium fire starters that I've used. Some of these little bitty ones that, I'll just go ahead and say it, they're made in China, and they deteriorate pretty quickly. And I've had some that we've tried in survival kits of different types, and after a year or so, the things basically are powder when you need them, or when you go to try to strike a spark, the thing begins to crumble on you. So there's a lot of information available on the internet as to what a good magnesium fire starter is and what a poor one is. And you've also talked about cooking at a fire ring. Can you talk about what options there are for people to cook?
Yeah, in today's world, a lot of people entertain in their backyard or on the patio or whatever, and a world of people have fire rings, and this can become an outdoor kitchen very easily. But you've got to be set up ahead of time so that you have a grill where you can actually put pots and skillets on the fire. You need to have a rack with hooks on it so you can hang pots over the fire. And you need to have utensils to work this fire. You need to have a shovel. You need to have a poker. You need to have lid lifters where you won't burn your hands every time you try to lift a lid of a cast iron pot. So the people who have fire rings in the yard, I commend them for having them, and they make a great outdoor kitchen. That was the only kitchen basically people had, either that or the fireplace, up until the early 1800s when we first started coming up with some sheep, steel, and cast iron stoves. So all we're doing is just going back to what we did in the 1700s. But you do have to have all the implements it takes to make this fire ring work. And so many people, friends that I've got, they've got great fire rings in the yard, but they have none of the tools that would set it up real quick to be an outdoor kitchen.
How about the vessels themselves? I mean, you just got back from your Dutch oven cooking book tour. Can you talk to us a little bit about why Dutch oven cooking? What are the advantages and what are the considerations to keep in mind?
I think, to me, Dutch oven cooking is probably the single best way to go with long-term survival. And if you go back and look in the late 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, whether it was a colonial kitchen in Maryland or whether it was cowboy camp, chuck wagon camp out on the western prairies, or the voyageurs going in canoes up through Canada, Dutch ovens was an important part of their cooking gear, and a lot of times was the only cooking gear that they had. And there are excellent Dutch ovens available in all sizes today, And you can do anything with a cast iron Dutch oven you can do with a electric or gas range at home. You can bake in them, you can boil in them, you can fry in them. You can do anything that you can do on your home stove. And this is the second book I've written on Dutch oven cooking. And there's a world of people do it as a hobby today, but a lot of these people also, when you're talking to them, they have thought about that their Dutch oven setup would be ideal if they had to go into long-term prepping and or long-term survival. So I think that Dutch oven cooking is the way to go. And again, it's going to take some effort to learn the skills. But once you've learned the skills and once you've purchased the tools and the pots that you need, as long as you've got a wood source, you can do anything out behind your house that you can do, or on your hearth that you've got a fireplace that you could do on the stove at home.
And the other thing about Dutch oven, I mean, they're so rugged, just as are like cast iron skillets, that sort of thing. It's going to last forever, basically. I mean, my mom passed away in her late 80s, and she handed down cast iron cookware that our son's getting married later this week, and he's going to be using that. It's just starting off a new household. It looks just as good as it did ever.
Well, a Lodge manufacturing company, who I do a lot of work with on Dutch ovens and outdoor cooking, they cannot produce cast iron skillets right now as fast as the market is purchasing them. And I asked them not long ago who's purchasing all these, and it's the millenniums. It's the young people. It's not us old folks. So a lot of people are turning back to these old ways of cooking, cast iron skillets, Dutch ovens, and the Dutch oven is especially good just simply because you can bake so good with it.
And what about other specialty approaches to concentrating the heat while cooking?
Well, reflector oven is another one that's ages old that you still see in a lot of camps, especially outfitter camps and cowboy camps. And you can bake in a reflector oven, and that's just simply a sheet metal oven, which is kind of wedge shaped with a shelf in the center of it, and you put it up close to a campfire or a fire ring, and anything that you want to bake is pretty easy to bake in it. And the learning curve on it is pretty gradual. It doesn't take very long to learn how to use a Dutch oven correctly. And then another thing that I picked up years and years and years ago, especially up in Canada and New England, is so many of the camps have what they call a beano, and it's a permanent beano, and I have one in my backyard. And it's simply a hole in the ground that's lined with fire bricks. You build a fire in it. You learn through a little bit of experience. You get that hole about 400 degrees, and you can put a complete meal in there in cast iron Dutch ovens. Put a cover over the hole, cover the cover up with dirt, and take off and be gone for a day. Come back, your meal is cooked, it's waiting on you, and it's still warm. So things like that. Bean hole cooking has been around forever. It's not widely known, but in some regions of North America, it's still used as much today as it ever was.
Just clarify, because it's just so everybody understands. When you cover it up, does that extinguish the fire, and is the heat from the bricks?
That's exactly what it does. This hole is 400 degrees hot, and when you put your Dutch ovens in there, I put as many as 3 or 4 in one at a time, and then you throw some hot coals on it, and then you can put a piece of metal roofing over it, say, and then just cover that up with mineral earth. And what it does, it smothers out the fire, and all day long this oven goes from 400 degrees down to about 100 degrees or so. So it doesn't burn your food. It just literally cooks it, keeps it moist, and when you come back in, your food's ready. When I was outfitting in Rocky Mountains and up in Canada and Alaska, that was the way we cooked a lot of times when we would have hunters out or fishermen out all day long, and we wanted the meal ready just as soon as we got in. So, and they call it beano because up in New England they cook most of the people that have camps up there cook different kinds of beans in it. It's just got the name bean hole. But you can cook anything. You can cook a stew, pot roast, whatever.
And it sounds like it has the added benefit if you get the slow cooking without having to tend to fire all day, for both from I can think of that from a labor saving, reduce your smoke signal as far as attracting unwanted attention, and also for safety if you're going to be gone and you don't need to leave this fire attended. Yeah,
there's a long list of positive things that come from having a bean hole, and I devoted, in this new Dutch oven book of mine, I devoted a whole chapter on how to build one and the various ways to use it and the advantages of it. So I encourage anybody that if they got room in their backyard, this is an excellent baker. I call it a baker because you can bake anything in it. An excellent baker to have in your yard, and for long term, I know some lumber camps has been using them for years and years.
How does the food supply that you have determine the type of cooking that you want to be considering?
Well, it may be that you may be in a long-term situation where you've got 5 years supply of freeze-dried foods, and even though you want to supplement those, that's going to be the main course you're going to have day in and day out. A person in a situation like that, basically all they got to do is boil water. And so they may not have to go to as much elaborate detail to have a bean hole or to learn hearth cooking skills or something like that. But a person who may be depending upon wild game, let's say, or doing a lot of foraging for wild plants, where they're going to have to do some baking, they're going to have to do some boiling, they're going to have to do frying from time to time. That's the people that really needs a fire ring and some pots and pans and tools to use to keep a fire going. So you got to think ahead. I think when you think in long-term survival, you need to think about what's going to be my food source. Where I live, am I going to be bartering with local farmers? Or am I going to be foraging primarily for edible wild plants? Or am I going to be doing basically hunting and trapping and living off of game? And then think about how you plan on cooking whatever it is you're going to have. And that's the kind of fire that you're going to need. And there's no one answer for everybody. Everybody has to look at their regional situation and their local situation.
And what's the number one skill building advice that you can give people? Because it sounds like a lot of the things you've talked about is not just about the tools, it's about the skill. So how do you develop that in the most effective way?
Probably the most effective way, and I'm thinking of my own, when I was trying to learn a lot of this, I grew up living like a lot of this, so I didn't have as far to go as some people. But even fairly recently, I have gone to some museums and places like that offer courses in hearth cooking. And this is cooking on the one that I liked the best was done at a museum, was done at a log cabin. It was built back in the late 1700s. And they start you off showing you how to build a fire in the fireplace and using 2 or 3 different methods. And then they take from that and build you up, showing you how to use the Dutch ovens, how to use the reflector ovens, how to boil some of the food, how to bake food. And at the end of the course, you have picked up about a dozen skills that people that didn't grow up like I did, those are valuable skills, and that's the only way I know to learn it is hands-on, where you have to do it. And I got good instructors there who can guide you through the process, because some of this is not that easy, especially for people who've never had to live that way.
And after that initial training, it sounds like repeated practice is going to be a way to benefit.
And that's the thing I can't emphasize enough. Yeah, you need, whether it's fire building, whether it's cooking in Dutch ovens or reflector ovens, or in a bean hole, or in a cast iron skillet in a fireplace, or on a wood burning stove. until you master these skills, you can't get enough practice. And waiting until a bad situation occurs is the wrong thing to do. Make it a fun part of your family's activities now. And periodically try these different things. And, yeah, you're going to make some mistakes, but as you go down the road with practice, you will overcome the mistakes, and you'll see that these primitive methods of cooking can be just as good as what you do in your modern kitchen today. So practice, practice, practice. That would be the most important thing I think anybody could do.
It reminds me of what, again, Brad Harris from Full Spectrum Survival talked about. He talked about making a habit of going camping with your family, because camping is going to give you an opportunity to do a lot of these skills. For some people who don't really feel attracted to some of the difficulties of camping or that sort of thing, even like you mentioned, backyard cooking, and even if you have your kids have some friends, you could have that other family, and you kind of have this not a competition, but an adventure where they come over one time and you try the new technique at your place, and then you go over there and try it at their place, just to bring it into the family and put some fun into it and make it an exploration. We try to take a lighthearted view whenever we try some new cooking technique, and I always end up, or my son ends up burning something, and people try to take it lightly and say, "Hey, charcoal's good for you." Some people take it for health, So
yeah, but I think what's amazing, we do a lot of primitive cooking in the backyard, and we use it as a part of entertaining friends and things like that. And a lot of our friends are not backwoods kind of people, and they are amazed at what you can do on an open fire because they've just never been exposed to it, and it catches on. Then they want to try it. So it's infectious, and I think that's a good thing, and especially for people who are interested in prepping for long-term emergencies. The best thing you can do is just turn it into fun, and then everybody learns and everybody gets something out of it.
Well, J. Wayne Fears, author of numerous books on outdoor survival, on orienteering, on wildlife management, search and rescue efforts, and most recently author of the Lodge Dutch Oven Cookbook, as well as the recommended Art of Building a Fire, which we have to check out here. Thank you so much always for joining us on Reluctant Preppers.
My pleasure, and have a good evening.